and welcome to the Blindfold Chess Podcast.
This week, we are looking at the long career of the 10th world champion, the youngest person to become a Grandmaster in history at that time, the youngest candidate to the World Championship at that time, and the famed opponent in the 1972 World Championship match against Bobby Fischer, Boris Spassky. Spassky learned to play chess at the age of 5 on a train evacuating Leningrad during the Siege of Leningrad during World War II. At the age of 10, he earned widespread attention by defeating the Soviet champion Mikhail Botvinnik in a simul. During this time, he was studying several hours a day with different masters, including Vladimir Zak, who coached other players like Viktor Korchnoi, Alexey Yermolinsky, Gata Kamsky, and others. That type of coaching helped as it allowed Spassky to earn a candidate master title at the age of 11, the Soviet master rank at the age of 15, and take home second at the Leningrad Championship. At the age of 16, Spassky branched out of the Soviet Union to play in his first international tournament in Romania. He tied for fourth, but in the tournament he defeated Vasily Smyslov, who was 1 year away from playing Mikhail Botvinnik for the World Championship. At the FIDE Congress of 1953, Spassky was awarded his International Master title. 2 years later, in 1955, at the age of 18, Spassky had a very busy year. He played for his first Soviet championship, tying for third. This qualified him for the Gothenburg Interzonal Tournament. He won the World Junior Chess Championship, scoring 14 out of 16. At that interzonal tournament, he shared a three-way tie for 7th, qualifying him for the Candidates Tournament of 1956, which also automatically earned him his Grandmaster title. At that time, he was the youngest person to qualify for the Candidates Tournament, and he was also the youngest person to hold the Grandmaster title, beating Petrosian's record by 5 years. At the Candidates Tournament of 1956, Spassky tied for third with 4 other players. However, the next 2 World Championship cycles were less kind to Boris. In the last round of the Riga tournament, where a win would advance him to the Portorez Interzonal Tournament, Spassky missed his winning chance against Mikhail Tal and ended the game with a draw. In the qualifying tournament of the Interzonal in 1960, he lost in the last round in a game to Leonard Stein. He also finished 10th out of 20 in the USSR Championship in 1960. However, he did make waves by being the first high-level player in 50 years to play and win with the King's Gambit, which was against David Bronstein. This game would later be used 3 years later as a reference in the James Bond film From Russia with Love. During his chess struggles, he was also going through marital struggles with his then wife. They divorced in 1961, and he also broke off training with his coach, Toulouche, whose coaching strategy focused primarily on a strong attacking style. One bright spot in 1960 was at the Mar del Plata tournament, where he finished in a tie for first place with Bobby Fischer. During their first career meeting, Spassky defeated Fischer. Boris changed his coach to Igor Bondarevsky, known for a much calmer strategy. After that change, Spassky won first at the USSR Championship of 1961. He tied for second in the Havana tournament in 1962. He tied for first at the 31st Soviet final in 1963, and he won first at Belgrade in 1964. Spassky then won the 1964 Soviet Zonal Tournament, qualifying him for the Candidates Tournament in Amsterdam later that year. During the 24-player, 23-round tournament, Spassky emerged on top with a 4-way tie, qualifying him for the Candidates in the following year. The Candidates Tournament was then changed to an 8-player knockout tournament. Spassky defeated Paul Keres 6-4 in round 1, Efim Geller 5.5 to 2.5, and in the final round he defeated Mikhail Tal 7-4, leveraging his coach's skills of quiet strategy to steer clear of Tal's tactical style, which qualified him to be the World Championship challenger for the 1966 World Championship. Sitting atop the mountain, Spassky was tasked with defeating the current world champion, Tigran Petrosian, who had become champion in 1963. Petrosian ended up victorious in the 24-game series, winning 12-10 in Game 22, but for fun, they played the remaining 2 games for a match score final of 12.5 to 11.5. This was the first outright victory of a sitting world champion since Alekhine defended his title in 1934. As Spassky was the previous challenger, he did not need to requalify for the 1968 candidates. He found himself in a familiar position during the next candidates tournament, where in the first round of the 8-player knockout tournament, he defeated Efim Geller by a score of 5.5 to 2.5, the same score he defeated him in the last match. Round 2, he defeated Bent Larsen 5.5 to 2.5, and in the final round of the candidates, he faced and defeated Viktor Korchnoi 6.5 to 3.5 to requalify him for the World Championship match of 1969 against Tigran Petrosian. After 16 games, the 2 players were tied 8-8, swapping 3 wins each. In the final 7 games, Spassky won 3 of them, winning the World Championship 1 game early with a score of 12.5 to 10.5. Decades later, Spassky went on the record saying, quote, "At that time, I was so strong that nobody could stop me." End quote. Spassky played in a variety of tournaments after becoming the world champion, including playing Board 1 at the USSR versus the World event, sharing first place at the Canadian Open, and sharing first at the IBM International Tournament in Amsterdam. However, the World Championship that he is most known for was his battle against Bobby Fischer in 1972, nicknamed the Match of the Century, taking place in Iceland. This tournament took place at the height of the Cold War, the Soviet-backed Spassky versus the scrappy American Fischer. Going into the match, Fischer had never won a game against Spassky, with 2 draws and 3 losses. During the match, Spassky was accommodating to many of Fischer's requests, including the type of set that they would play on, where the TV cameras needed to be, and a change to the venue after the 3rd game. The first game, after arriving late to the start of the match, Fischer blundered his bishop, allowing Spassky to pull ahead 1-0. Game 2, Fischer forfeited. Some sources say that Fischer was about to leave Iceland, but he was dissuaded by his second, William Lombardi, to stay. Spassky agreed to move the game out of the main hall and into a side room to allow Fischer to continue to play. Game 3, Fischer turned the tables by winning in a modern Benoni for his first ever win against Spassky. This turned out to be the psychological turning point of the match for Fischer. He went on to win 4 of the next 7 games. The 2 players drew games 14-20, and Fischer clinched the World Championship in Game 21 with a win in a final score of 12.5 to 8.5. Having lost his World Championship title, Spassky continued to perform quite well. He won the 41st Soviet Championship a full point ahead of the pack. He qualified for the 1974 Candidates Tournament, where he lost in a semi-final match to Karpov, who would later become the world champion after Fischer had forfeited. He was nominated to play in the 1976 Candidates Tournament after Fischer declined to retain his spot. Around this point, Spassky also left the Soviet Union and immigrated to France to be with his 3rd wife. In the 1977 Candidates Tournament, Spassky advanced to the finals, where he lost to Viktor Korchnoi 10.5 to 7.5. Korchnoi ended up losing to Karpov in the World Championship in 32 games. In the 1980 Candidates Tournament, Spassky lost to Lohas Portish in the first round on the tiebreaks of who won the most games with black. In the 1982 Interzonal Tournament, Boris missed qualifying for the candidates by half of a point. This was the last time that he played at the candidate level strength. During his career, Spassky also participated in 7 different Olympiads for the Soviets, earning 6 team golds, 1 team silver, 3 board golds, and 2 board bronzes. Towards the later part of his playing career, he continued to participate in various tournaments, but as he got older, it became harder and harder to score even above the middle of the pack of these elite tournaments. In 1992, after a 20-year hiatus, Bobby Fischer emerged for a revenge match of the 20th century in Yugoslavia. At that point, Spassky was rated 106th on the FIDE list, and Fischer was not rated due to his inactivity. The 30-game match ended with a 10-5 victory for Fischer. No one really took the match that seriously, as both players were well past their prime. Spassky, for playing, pocketed $1.65 million, whereas Fischer earned himself a warrant for his arrest in the United States for breaking the UN's sports sanctions. After that match, Spassky has largely faded out of competitive play. He has had a couple of strokes that has left his left side paralyzed, but as of writing this, Spassky is still alive at the age of 88. For today's game, we are traveling 65 years in the past to the Mar del Plata tournament of 1960. Carlos Incutto versus Boris Spassky. Now, if we're ready, let's begin.
1. Pawn to e4. Pawn to e5. Two, knight f3. Knight c6. Three, bishop b5. Pawn to f5.
So the pawn move to f5 is a typical idea in the King's Gambit, which we already talked about, that Spassky has played earlier in his career. But f5 is considered a weakening move on the king side for black. So why would black be willing to go into this type of structure and expose himself to these types of weaknesses? The pawn on f5 does attack white's center on e4, but eventually it will also allow black to have a rook on f8 after black castles on the king's side with a semi-open file, and it also allows more activity for black's pieces, like allowing the knight on f6 to have another attacker on the e4 square.
4. Knight c3. Knight f6. Five, pawn to d3. Pawn f captures e4. Six, pawn d captures e4. Bishop b4. Seven, queen d3. Pawn to d6. Eight, bishop d2. Bishop captures c3.
So black is exchanging a 3-point piece, being his bishop, for white's 3-point piece, being the knight on c3. However, black is doing this unprovoked. There is no piece attacking the bishop that is on b4. There is no pawn to a3 that is attacking the bishop on b4. So why do you think black would play a move like bishop captures on c3? While giving white the bishop pair, black is also weakening white's control over the e4 pawn and the d5 square. Black is also going through and putting all of his pawns onto dark squares, such as the pawn that is on e5 and d6 and c7. So for every pawn that is on a dark square, you are reducing the scope of white's dark square bishop. So through this, black is creating more weaknesses and reducing the scope of the minor piece that white still has on the board.
Nine. Bishop captures c3. Bishop d7. 10. Castle queenside. Queen e7. 11. Queen e3. Castle kingside. 12. Pawn to h3. King h8. 13. Bishop c4. Pawn to a5. 14. King b1. Bishop e6. 15. Bishop captures e6. Queen captures e6. Sixteen. Knight g5. Queen g8. 17. Queen e2. Knight d7.
Moving the knight from f6 to d7 does allow black to have control of the semi-open file with his rook that is on f8. However, the knight that was on f6 is now aiming for a journey onto the queen side. If you were black, what would be your target destination for this knight?
18. Pawn to g3. Knight c5. 19. Pawn to b3. Pawn to h6. 20. Pawn to h4. Pawn to a4.
By playing the move pawn to a4, black is deciding that it does not want to capture the knight that is hanging on g5 with the pawn that is on h6. Why did Spassky choose to not capture the quote-unquote free piece on g5? If black were to play pawn h captures on g5, white would respond pawn h captures on g5 check. Black's only legal move would be queen to h7, and then white would respond with rook captures on h7, winning black's queen.
Knight h3. Pawn captures b3. (22) Pawn c captures b3. Knight captures b3. (23) Pawn captures b3.
Having already sacrificed a piece for 2 pawns, Black is still trying to continue the attack. White's pawn on b3 is currently hanging. What black piece can capture White's pawn on b3?
Queen captures b3 check. (24) Queen b2. Queen c4. (25) Queen c2. Knight b4. White resigns.
After the move knight to b4, White resigned in this position. There are 2 primary variations that we can look at to see how Black can secure the win. We'll first look at bishop captures on b4, which would be followed by Black's a8 rook going to a1 with check, White capturing the rook that is on a1, and then Black playing queen captures on c2 for check, and Black is threatening checkmate by playing rook to a8. So that way does not work for White. So instead, after Black were to play knight to b4, if White were to play the move queen to b2, then Black can play queen captures on e4 check, and if White were to play king to c1, Black can play rook to a1 check. If White were to play king to d2, Black can play queen to d3 check, king to e1 is the only move, and then queen captures on d1 checkmate. So either way, White is in a lot of trouble. Many people remember Spassky for the 1972 World Championship, but I hope this episode helped bring to light how strong of a player he really was. A hero's journey of success, failure, and the need to rebuild to come out even stronger. The youngest Grandmaster in history at that time, a consistent candidate, peaking at number 2 in the world ranking, and defeating 6 different world champions at least twice, including Smyslov, Tal, Petrosian, Fischer, Karpov, and Kasparov. So that is all that we have for this week. Tune in next time where we will continue to work on our blindfold skills and look at another game of the Masters.